President Salva Kiir of South Sudan appeals to President Buhari to find lasting solutions to the political and security situation in his country.
Vice President Oshibajo hosts Adamawa State delegation, promises resolution of herdsmen and farmers' clashes.
And Senate resolves to urge government to protect the rights of bank customers as House passes a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a National Research and Innovation Council.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we focus on the lingering Senate-executive relationship and face-off.
All right, let's begin by quickly, of course, rendering our sincere apologies. We understand when we started earlier on, of course, there was loss of audio at the beginning, but actually we started with a quotation that was attributed to the chairman, Senate Ad hoc Committee on Economic Matters in the Nigeria Customs Service, Senator Dino Melaye, on an alleged breach of protocol, Kingsley, by the Controller General of Nigeria Customs Service.
That's correct. And indeed, of course, the story has been widely reported, including, of course, the response by the Controller General of Customs to the senators who had visited the Customs headquarters on oversight function. That, of course, is an indication of the latest of the series of altercations, of incidents of face-off between the executive branch and the Senate in particular, which has resulted in the Senate saying that it would not consider further nominees by the president, for appointments. And those appointments include filling very crucial positions. For instance, the EFCC, still has an acting chairman. The MPC, that's the Monetary Policy Committee of the CBN, could not hold its meeting in January this year because it didn't have a quorum. There are a number of vacancies yet to be filled. The National Population Commission is also there. You have positions also on the NCC, that's the Communications Commissions, as well as the Electricity Regulatory Commission.
Indeed, Kingsley. And of course, you know that this all started with the emergence of the Senate President, of course, Bukola Saraki. We understood at the time the party did not give its nod and all that. And of course, it's been,
it's
one
been lingering,
issue.
yes.
Yeah, it's been lingering,
yes.
and all that. And quite a number of people, had been involved. We know, of course, the case of the former SGF, Babachi Lawal. Many of them refused to honor, some of the invitations of the Senate and all that.
And indeed, a committee was set up at some point, headed by the Vice President, to try to smoothen the relationship between the executive branch and the Senate in particular. But it would appear that there is no let-up in the ongoing face-off between the two arms of government, or shall we say the one of the arms of government and the other arm of government. But that's the issue that we're taking a look at in our discussion segment on Good Morning Nigeria today. A number of questions to pose to our guests, and of course we'll expect enthusiastic responses from them. Let's quickly join our colleague, Larry Bala Hassan, for brief highlights of the morning news.
Good morning and a warm welcome to the news. President Salva Kiir of South Sudan has made a passionate appeal to President Muhammadu Buhari to help in finding lasting solutions to the precarious political and security situation in his country. State House correspondent Adam Sambo reports that this was when South Sudan's president visited the Nigerian leader on the sidelines of the just concluded summit of the African Union in Addis Ababa.
Wants Mr. President to remain a real factor in trying to broker peace in that country.
Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has arrived Abuja after participating in the 30th ordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union. The president at the summit was entrusted with the responsibility of championing the anti-corruption fight, with the theme "Winning the Fight Against Corruption, a Sustainable Path to Africa's Development." While presenting Nigeria's position in favor of the report on the establishment of a continental free trade area and related issues, President Buhari canvassed for a speedy, single and unified market in Africa to increase trade, create jobs and reduce poverty. In a rapid changing global economy with much uncertainty, President Buhari believes that the establishment of a continental free trade area would provide Africa with tremendous opportunity to achieve significant growth driven by intra-African trade. And back home, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says the Buhari administration is determined to resolve the herdsmen and farmers' clashes and return peace and order to affected communities. This was when the Vice President received a delegation of Bata and Bachama communities of Adamawa State in Abuja. And to the National Assembly now, where the Senate has resolved to urge government to protect the rights of bank customers and end the culture of excess and arbitrary charges imposed by the financial institutions. National Assembly correspondent Dennis Adegunloye reports that this followed a motion on the urgent need to investigate, regularize and amend conflicting remedies which the CBN offers to victims of illegal deductions by commercial banks. The senators also considered and passed the 2018 FCT Appropriation Act Amendment Bill 2018.
20th of February reported that it had recovered over 2.6 billion naira from depositors' funds from banks as excess charges imposed on their customers in 2015 alone.
The monumental fraud that takes place in this sector, the banking sector, is a very fearful one.
And still at the National Assembly, the House of Representatives has passed for third reading a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a National Research and Innovation Council. The bill seeks, among other issues, to promote genuine discoveries and scientific innovations among Nigerians.
That a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of the National Research and Innovation Council, National Research and Innovation Foundation, and for matters related thereto, be read a third time.
A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of the National Research and Innovation Council, National Research and Innovation Foundation, and for matters related thereto. Third reading.
And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Claire and Kingsley after the break. Good morning.
All right, now it's time for us to go straight into our newspaper review segment with Bayo Atoyebi right here with us in the studios.
Bayo has already been introduced, Bayo. So let's get on with the review of, quickly, this day newspaper I start with, and it has as its lead story, panel recommends Guazo's sack as Adeosun defends his ouster. It comes with a rider, suspended DG contests power to unseat him, maintains minister asked him to stop or undo audit. That's the lead story, and just a little above that, NPA gives Intels 2 weeks to pay $48 million debt. But of course, the rider there says firm insists it has settled dispute awaiting AGF's clearance. Other stories on the front page here, I think we'll just, okay, NNPC just above the nameplate. NNPC staff, 7 others killed by herders in Benue and Nasarawa. Again, Buhari orders arrest of persons involved killings. Kingsley.
All right. I have the Punch newspaper. The lead story for the Punch is the same on the suspended SEC DG. STED stands for the Securities Exchange Commission, the DG. Guarzo, you have the story there. Claire has already read that. Now, above the nameplate of the Punch newspaper, there are a couple of headlines we'll take from there. Gunmen kill 7 in Nasarawa, and Taraba wants a fresh attack. That's on page 7. And then the EFCC can't probe states' accounts without Assembly's nod. That's a court decision, and details of that story can be found on page 10. Senate, this is an earpiece now beside the nameplate. Senate warns Nigerians against investment in bitcoins. That story is in greater detail on page 25. Now, you have a composite of photographs on the front page of the Punch newspaper. The caption there says, Cameroonian gendarmes invade Cross River community. And that's on page 5. So the photograph, 3 photographs there showing the alleged invaders from Cameroon. Now, below that, you have other headlines. 2019, INEC to announce results electronically. That's on page 10. Benue killings. Senate's ultimatum expires. IG fails to arrest killers. That's on page 13. And federal government will start building $5.8 billion Mambila power plant. That's on page 24. And below that, you have the story, Sultan and Olni urge federal government to probe killings. That's on page 14. Bayo.
Yes. Clashes between herders and farmers this year alone, just this January, today is January 31st, has claimed 168 lives. And for last year, 2017, 549 lives were lost across 14 states. This is the revelation provided by the Amnesty International, and Amnesty is saying that this had led to displacement of persons in the violent areas, and the response has been very slow, and the killers are yet to get arrested. However, while the Vice President was receiving traditional rulers, Hama Bata and Hama Bachama, at the presidency yesterday, he says that the herders-farmers clash, though predates this administration, the presidency is determined to end the clash and violence associated with it. He says that apart from consulting traditional rulers, the presidency is also relying on a report of the National Animal Production Research Institute, Zaria, NAPRI, and will also be considered in reaching these solutions. The Vice President emphasized emphatically that it was important to disarm all persons with firearms because it is an offense to carry firearms on license. Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari also, while sending his address to the 9th General Assembly of National Council of Traditional Rulers, said killings in Benue and other states amount to a declaration of war. And he added, they must be brought to an end. The president was represented by the Minister of Interior, and it was at that occasion that the Sultan and Oni also lended their voice. They said the federal government must probe all the issues surrounding the killings. Meanwhile, there is alarm in Danere local government area in Cross River State. Cameroonian gendarmes numbering about 80 were said to have invaded the place. They were supposedly said to be chasing separatists claiming Ambazonian Republic from Cameroon. And it's not the first time. They were there January 25th. And that is violating our territorial integrity.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. If you recall the clash that occurred in 1981 during the Shehu Shagari's presidency, yes. That was one of the creeks that became now part of Bakassi. I think that it's a matter that the federal government should look into.
Yes, not only that, if you recall too, there was Chadian gendarmes who came across. At that time, I think it was the 3rd Armored Brigade in Jos. It was then commanded by Major General Muhammadu Buhari. I think he said he was going to give the Chadians the bloody nose, and he drove them back across the border.
Across the border.
Okay, that story is on the inside page of the Daily Sun, actually, and it's captioned, 10 Cameroonian gendarmes invade Nigerian community.
So if there are allegations also that some of the killer headsmen are foreigners, so we are having invasion, the pincer attack, as it were, from mercenary headers, and then Cameroonian gendarmes also violating our territorial integrity. So there's some urgent assignment for the security and defense agencies.
There's that ruling that you read about in Ekiti, and it is very curious. There's a ruling by the court in Ekiti, saying that the economic and financial crime cannot investigate crime, allegations of crime in the state without the State House of Assembly first investigating it. EFCC has indicated that it will appeal, but what that points out is that the EFCC Act, which says that the EFCC has the prerogative to investigate crime without a specification of jurisdiction, is now called to question.
Absolutely. So we are waiting to see what the decisions will be upstairs. That's to say the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, if the FCC decides to take the step. But there are a number of persons who have heard the decision. They say, oh, it represents true federalism. But suppose you have malfeasance going on with the state accounts and the State House of Assembly is unwilling or unable to investigate and then, of course, pass an indictment. What then happens? That's a question.
Okay, I think we have the editorial.
Yeah, we have the editorial for the Punch newspaper. Is the title of the editorial is Beyond Palliatives, Power Sector Needs Overhaul. It says government's seeming lack of grasp and decisiveness in dealing with power issues has become more apparent in no other manner than in the way it has been intervening in the metering of electricity consumers in the country. The editorial also goes on to say that beyond the new metering policy which the government has introduced, it's a time for the government to take a hard look at the concept of the power privatization exercise in general.
Well, a lot of questions have been raised about the power privatization with the argument that the dividends of that privatization has not come. Again, it goes back to the argument that government is not a good manager of public business. We have the Chinese construction engineering company doing a lot of business here. It is a Chinese government company. It's not the private company. Right. And most of the time, we advocate that sell these public entities to private citizens. We don't bring angels to man them. It's still the same Nigerians that are manning them. Why don't we tackle the problems that make people think that public property is for free for people to loot? Unless we address that, we will not be able to move forward. But there has been tremendous improvement. By May 15, power level were about 3,000 megawatts. Today, we are about 7,000. The challenge was about transmission because about 2,000 megawatts could not be transmitted because of limitations in facilities. But
there's also the problem with distribution.
Distribution.
That's where the metering nuisance is.
Yes. In fact, talking about metering nuisance, you have what is called estimated bill. People who depend on estimated bill get power supply, while those with meters that pay as they consume hardly get supply.
All right, Bayo, thanks a lot. Just before we wrap up the newspaper review segment, if you recall yesterday, one of the topics that you discussed, and you also saw the photographs, had to do with the funeral activities for the late Vice President, Dr. Alex Ekweme. We discussed it and we saw the photographs. Now, yesterday, a very senior citizen and an eminent jurist, after the program, drew my attention to the nature of the flag that was draped on the mahogany casket of the late Vice President. That, obviously, is not the Nigerian flag. The Nigerian flag is green, white, green. If you take a look at the photographs on the front pages of the papers yesterday, that flag was embroidered at the edges. That is one, which is wrong. And then we also had in the white segment the coat of arms. This is the abuse and misuse of the flag that we have been seeing over and over again. That's a state function. And you have to ask yourself, what was the Special Duties Department in the office of the STF doing?
All right, Kingsley, that's a major observation,
it's sad,
but of course, and a very sad one. But let's get
our flag.
We would like to appreciate you as always, and thanking you for getting up so early. Not many people, will be able to do that. Of course, we must give credit to Kingsley. But let's get on.
What is the vote of thanks for?
It was my mild yellow card for me.
All right, we are discussing the altercations, of course, between the Senate and the executive. And today we've seen, of course, at the beginning of this program, we've had quite a number of hiccups in our take-up. But let's take a break now. When we come back, we'll begin our conversation.
All right, you're welcome back. But if you just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, at the beginning of the program, my colleague Claire and I, of course, did indicate that today our discussion will center on the lingering face-off between the Senate and the executive branch of government. And in a number of instances, the latest, of course, being the altercation between an ad hoc committee of the Senate and the Comptroller General of Customs over protocol issues, who to receive whom and where. But we do know also that the Senate has for some time now declined to consider the confirmation of persons nominated by Mr. President for appointment. Taken off, of course, from the post or the position of the acting chair of the EFCC. We have other positions that are vacant. The MPC, as we indicated, the MPC standing for the Monetary Policy Committee of the CBN, could not hold its meeting in January this year on account of the fact that it had no quorum. There are a number of vacancies yet to be filled. The National Population Commission is also there. The relationship, of course, between the Senate and the executive, or indeed between the National Assembly and the executive branch, that's the presidency, has been hot and cold, and in particular with the Senate, rather lukewarm. We have guests with us in the studios to get into the details of this and what might be the way out of the continuing logjam. It's election year, it's election season, and perhaps there might be some common ground. Let's quickly introduce our guest now, Claire.
All right, let's quickly introduce right here in the studio Senator Aliyu Sabi Abdullahi. He's the Chairman, Senate Committee on Media and Publicity, the spokesperson of the Senate. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we also have here quite interesting composition, Senator Ita Enang, the SSA to the President of National Assembly Matters, Senate. We're very glad to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
And Kingsley.
All right, then we also have with us, perhaps it will be a moderating voice. A moderating voice is Professor of Political Science, Professor Nuhu Yakubu, who is a former Vice Chancellor of the University of Abuja here, and also former Vice Chancellor of Sokoto State University. Professor Yakubu, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
All right. So let's begin. I mean, quite clearly the matter is there in the public domain. The relationship between the Senate and the executive branch of government at the federal level isn't chummy. What is at stake, Senator Sabi?
Well, I think first, let me say that in a democracy, very clearly, the Constitution is the ground norm that defines the relationship between the three arms of government. And for me, I would say that that relationship is meant to promote and enthrone a democratic culture that definitely respond to what the Constitution says we must be doing, which is good governance and promoting the welfare and security of our citizens. So I would say that for us in the 8th Senate and indeed the 8th National Assembly, these facts are not lost on us, and we believe in whatever we do, we must try as much as possible to adhere very strictly to all of these tenets. And I will say that in this particular dispensation, this is a change government. And of course, we came with the mantra of promoting the rule of law and ensuring that whatever we do stays within the ambit of the rule of law. And I think because of this, I would say we have a very wonderful relationship with the executive. Wonderful in the sense that where people seemingly sees what they call infractions or crisis or whatever, I think if you go back and look at the fact that we are trying to promote the rule of law as much as the executive is trying to, then I think the rest can be clearly seen that it's just a matter of interpersonal relationship and how we go about tackling them. So for me, let me say that, yes, there are this issue about, the clearance, for example, the, nomination of some particular offices, and the fact that there is a crisis. Definitely there is a crisis with that, because the facts are very clear, and I will say the issue right now is in the domain of the presidency, because we have, from beginning, cleared a number of, offices. The service chiefs are there, and there are other positions that came. And that clearance was going on and on until the issue of the EFCC chairman came on board, for which we rejected that twice. And, he's still there acting. But remember, what brought about this impasse was the fact that the acting vice president, the acting president then, the vice president, came out to say that all those nominations that they were forwarding to the Senate for confirmations, the Senate does not even have the power to do that. And I think it was on the basis of that particular, statement that the issue was brought to the Senate chamber, and the Senate deliberated upon it and said, well, if the executive is claiming that we do not have powers to do confirmation hearing and to clear these people, then within that context, there is no need we waste our energy and time looking at any other confirmation.
So there are, right now, still gray areas to address.
Well, the issue is that what I've just pointed out.
Precisely. Let's bring in the distinguished Senator Ita Enang. To what extent can you say that the relationship between the executive and the assembly, in this case the Senate, has been cordial?
The relationship has been very, very cordial, and it is based on the principle of executive do your work and legislature do your work. Each person do your job in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. And you also remember that one of my greatest maxims is in managing executive legislative relations is anytime you see the executive and the legislature hands in glove, in warm, terrible embrace, the public should be worried, because they are each supposed to watch over the rights of others and then defend the Constitution. Now, the only question that is an issue now between the executive and the legislature is the question of clearance. And the clearance is that of clearance of persons whose appointments are named or listed in the act passed by the National Assembly. You remember that last week we conducted, or 2 weeks ago, and even last week, there were the clearance and confirmation screening of the Grand Cadi of the Sharia Court of Appeal. There was the one of resident electoral commissioners, 9 that were forwarded by Mr. President. There were the ones of the Code of Conduct burial. Those ones are going on. But I think that there was the ones that are stated by the Act of the National Assembly, like Independent Corrupt Practice and Other Related Offences Commission, and the ones that the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, and other than Central Bank of Nigeria, then Deposit Insurance Corporation, and other ones, they are pending. And that was pending on account of the feeling by the distinguished Senate that there was the assertion that they don't have powers to do the screening, or the power for them to screen is circumscribed, or the Constitution allows the executive to proceed beyond. But I believe that that has been addressed, and we've gone beyond that. And addressed and gone beyond that because Mr. President still forwards the nominations which are for clearance to the Senate, which admits that the Senate has the powers of screening and confirming. Because if Mr. President and the executive believe that the legislature does not have the powers, we would have asked the president would have asked the nominees of ICPC, the nominees of the central bank, the deputy governor, the chairman of the central bank, and all others to go ahead and do their job. You would have had a situation where you would have had acting deputy governor of the central bank, acting chairman of the independent ICPC. You would have had acting chairman of other agencies. But Mr. President forward the nominations to the Senate. Therefore, and on this matter, around about the 16th, about the 15th of January, His Excellency held, I think about the 17th, that was a day after the Senate resumed, about the 17th of January. Mr. President had a one-on-one with the leadership of the Senate on it. They had very intimate discussions and address of these matters. And I believe that with what was discussed, I was present, we are soon coming out of the logjam. And I know that the Senate has been very responsive. The Senate has been very cooperating with the executive. The Senate has shown a lot of responsibility, and I believe that this will soon be over. But yes, there is that logjam, but it's not beyond being addressed. But on the question of where do we stand now, I believe that where we stand now is that we've moved beyond it, because the president still sends nomination. The president accords the legislature, the Senate, its due respect. And the principle is, do the job at the legislature, let me do my job as the executive, and not infract on the powers of the other. And sometimes when you see something that appears to be logjam like this, it is perhaps a constitutional appreciation.
All right.
Yeah, well, distinguished Senator Itai, thank you very much. Gentlemen, you both are still speaking like diplomats. Let's bring in Professor Nuhu Yakubu now. Professor Nuhu Yakubu, let's move to the Senate is, shall we say now, selectively dealing with nominations by the president in terms of confirmation or clearance. But the core issue remains that there are a number of positions that have not been filled. Are you thrilled or excited by the comment made by Senator Itai that we are almost out of the current logjam?
Well, it's his opinion, but the way I look at the issue, the relationship between the executive and the legislative branches of government, is that it is really a sad commentary on the issue of governance in this country. Sad commentary in the sense that, both the president and the majority in the National Assembly, belong to the same party. And one would expect that in this kind of situation, what normally will have happened is that clearly the two sides will explain to one another what the issues are. And if it is the question of, the non-suitability of some of the officers, for instance, let's take the particular case of EFCC chairman, which has actually been a long drum battle between the executive and the legislative branches. If the issue is non-suitability, of the nominee for the post, I think, it becomes very important for the executive to take a second look at it, and, based on recommendations that will also have to come from the legislative body or arm, it will be very clear what is it that is the major issue about the non-suitability of the nominee. And this should be cleared, especially, as I said, the two arms of government largely, they belong in the same party. The president is from the APC, and in the Senate, at the moment you have a majority of 60 belonging to APC, the party of the president, and only 49 members from the PDP. So why should this logjam be allowed, to fester up to this moment? I think this is the question that, Nigerians are keen about to know. And for me, I think that, there are methodological issues that, probably have not been addressed by particularly the executive branch. For instance, in the presidential system of government, and indeed in a democratic setup, even though I have my reservation about the kind of democracy we practice in this country, but whatever may be the case, you have, there's the existence of the instrument of lobbying. Why is it that, the executive branch has not even resorted to this is the question that needs to be answered. And I'm happy that we have a distinguished senator who is currently serving, the licensing officer who is also, he was still, it goes by the nomenclature of the senator. He was in the Senate also. There should have been, apart from, this issue of lobbying, there should have been a kind of understanding that should exist between both the executive and the legislative branch. I think that's a problem.
Prof, let me quickly, I'm sorry to interject, let me quickly ask you, you listened to the opening remarks of Senator Sabi Abdullahi, and he did say, look, the Senate, especially, of course, is working within the powers conferred on it by the Constitution. And you also heard him say, look, whatever remains to be done is now rests with the executive. Do you see that as areas coming together of two arms of government? Is that the impression that we get from the two response we've gotten this morning?
No, I think the issue, nobody is questioning the role that is constitutionally specified for the legislative branch, which is to make law. Make laws, carry out oversight functions and confirmation of appointees of the executive branch. They are doing what they are supposed to do, and the presidency has also, or the executive branch has also provided them with, their working tools, as it were. Especially this issue of confirmation of appointment. What I'm saying is simply that, yes, both branches of government should do their work. They are trying to do their work, but I am also saying that given the nature of the constitution of even the National Assembly, and the fact that both the president and the majority in the National Assembly, particularly in the Senate, and indeed in the whole of the National Assembly, because this issue is not just limited to the question of confirmation of nominees of the executive branch, but also that what I have this question for the National Assembly: why is it that it takes the National Assembly so long to actually come out with, the budget in time? That is in terms of, looking critically about, passing the budget, as quickly as it is presented to the National Assembly.
Yeah, well, Professor Yakubu, I'm sure that the National Assembly, I'm not holding brief for them. They will retort that it depends on when they receive the estimates by way of appropriation bill. But some of the points that you've raised,
yes.
I would like the two senators, one serving and then the other now senior special assistant to Mr. President. This is on sabbatical. There is a feeling of deja vu in what's playing out. Despite the saccharine, expressions relating to what's going on, how we are trying to smoothen things, we saw this play out in the 7th Assembly. The PDP had a majority, and yet the altercation between the executive branch and the National Assembly made headlines frequently. And here we are again, perhaps of an alternated nature. You are still having this face-off between in this case now, we're talking about the Senate and the executive branch, and the issues are there, even if we try to paper over them. What is it that hasn't quite worked in terms of managing the relationship between the executive and the legislature? And I remember Senator Itainag, on the eve of this administration, we had you here as a guest, and one of the frequent proposals you made was it would be useful, to have backroom or backstage consultations before bringing matters into the open. What appears to have gone wrong this time?
I still believe that, and the present administration does a lot of backstage consultations, a lot and a great lot of it. Professor Yakubu has said that they should be lobbying, and the President Buhari-led administration has done a lot of lobbying of the legislature. The lobbying that is done is the lobby that is allowed by law, and that is what the legislature understands. Because a lot of people should understand lobbying to be some level of unlawful interventions. But lobbying that has been done in this case is when we had the altercations with the issues when the issues arose, while His Excellency, the Vice President, was still acting president, there was a meeting. And after the president took over, returned from medical vacation and took over, there was meetings also. Now, in November last year, when it became so difficult, when it became evident that we weren't getting to a solution, we had a meeting between the leadership of the entire National Assembly. I think it was in November. That is Senate leadership and House leadership at the instance of the Vice President, November last year. And we arrived at a certain level of understanding to move on from there. We tried. It didn't really materialize in terms of active solution. And then the president again intervened on the 17th. First, it was on the 15th where he had a meeting briefing the leadership of the National Assembly on the security situation, and also that is the Senate and the House on the 15th of January. And that was just National Assembly and the Senate and House of Representatives on the 15th of January. Then on the 17th of January, he had a specific meeting with the leadership of the Senate. In fact, those present were the Senate President, the Deputy President of the Senate, the Leader of the Senate, the Minority Leader of the Senate, the Deputy, I think the Deputy Minority Leader wasn't there, then other principal officers of the Senate, myself, the Chief of Staff, and other leaders of the executive. We had this meeting and a discussion, frank and eyeball-to-eyeball discussion between the Mr. President and the leadership of the National Assembly in person. I believe that the level of intervention and this back room, this is enough, this is back room that I talked about at that time. That's right. And it is not something that, you have discussed this, and when we came out, in fact, it wasn't a matter for the public as to what it was. I believe that this is a great back room, person to person, and face to face, issue point by point. I believe that when we talk of lobbying, this is lobbying. When you talk of back room, this is back room. When you talk of leadership, this leadership on the part of President Buhari. And I know that the legislature were moved by it. And I believe that His Excellency, the Senate President, the leadership, and communicated with the distinguished senators and Senate in executive session and perhaps in plenary. But I believe that this is still working. We will have a solution very soon. Because all that is needed to be done and should be done at the back room, at lobbying, at face-to-face, has been done by President Buhari. Okay,
let me also ask you, just before we come back to Senator Sabi, is it possible for the Senate in this case to permit my choice of words, jump and pass the laws which itself has created? And I ask this question because there were resolutions passed by the Senate, which were not upheld by the executives and by extension, appointees of the executive. So what is the thinking of the executive?
Like which of the resolutions?
So many of them. For instance, the one on the leadership of the EFCC, for instance, is still pending. So what's the thinking of the executive, in not upholding some of these resolutions?
Well, the thinking of the executive, remember that there were 5 nominees or 6 nominees of the EFCC. That is the chairman and other members. The question is, the issue is that the Senate only took the nomination of the chairman. They did not take the nomination of other members. It did not. No, they haven't considered this. Okay, they committed it to the committee. They committed all to the committee. And the report is on. But the question is, why has the executive not complied with that is in strict sense, complied with the resolution? That is the discussion that His Excellency, Mr. President, had with His Excellency, the President of the Senate and all leaders, and which has been discussed. I will be, because not much should be said in the public so that it doesn't inflame passions. But I can only tell you that meetings were held, discussions were on. But it will not be appropriate to come out and say, look, these were the matters that were discussed in those meetings, because those were still privileged discussions. And the most important thing is, have they sat, have they met, have they discussed? Is the issue on the table? Yes, it is on the table.
Has it been resolved? That's
Has
the
it
question.
been resolved
Senator
is
Sabi.
the question
Yes.
of appreciation.
First, let me provide one context. You see, there is this saying in my place that when I come into the market and losing your wrapper and left you bare naked, I should not take you into the room and put a gold cloth on you. If I must put that gold cloth, I must come back to the same place where I made you naked and tie that gold clothes on you. This issue is very simple. The executive came out and said we do not have that powers. If that was an error, let them admit it. And I think if you do that and say, well, we erred, as far as this subject matter is concerned, we believe within the confines of the law, it is your responsibility. Please go ahead and discharge your responsibility. As far as I'm concerned, this issue is as simple as this. The issue is very, very simple, because, like you said, discussions will be held. But remember, the way Parliament or the way the legislature works is that everybody is in the chamber to represent diverse interests. And I think earlier on, Prof was talking about the majority. The subject matter, as far as I'm concerned, is institutional. It's not longer a partisan matter. It is something that falls within the realm of the institution of the Senate as a democratic institution. And I think if we respect the fact that in democracy, give and take is the hallmark, where that is where you talk about the lobby. That's where you talk about the engagement. You provide reasons. You try to engage the other person to see more your own point of view. And I think if this is done, senators will definitely understand. But the situation where people felt we are trying our best, remember, out of all the requests brought by the presidency, I don't have the current figure, but I want to say that as at last year, when we looked at all the requests, about 100 and so amount of requests coming, we cleared over, 90 something. Putting in percentage time, it was about 98% or 99%, which means the only one, if you look at all the requests that came, was the EFCC chairman that we actually rejected. Then there was that of the NDDC, where we felt the nominee did not comply with the provisions of the law. We rejected that, and they went back, looked at the point we made, and they brought the right person, and we cleared that person. Okay? Incidentally, that person now got caught in this web of, the altercation. So the point I'm trying to make is this. And by the way, we are not doing anything selective. That one that falls within the ambit of those laws that we passed, which was assented to by the presidency, these laws are not vetoed. So it was a law that the National Assembly passed, and it was willingly assented to by Mr. President. So those ones, these are the ones that we have selected and kept aside. And that is why he's talking about the issue of Rex, because there is no ambiguity about that, if permit me to use that word. So I think the issues are very straightforward. And you see, many instances, let's be fair to our leadership. Our leadership in the National Assembly are first among equals. And that is why the Constitution says it is the senators or the members of the House of Reps themselves that will select whoever they want. So when they select their presiding officers, the presiding officers are loyal and bound by their own members. So whatever you go out there, and if the members are not in agreement, the presiding officer can only come and also lobby his own colleagues plead with them to understand. If they do, good. But if they don't, the struggle continues.
I admit.
So I think this is the way these things work, and we shouldn't try to put them in the spotlight. No. Like I said, this issue goes beyond the bipartisan nature of the chamber. It is an agreed issue because we are talking about an institution. The Senate is one of the most important institutions in the democracy, just like the House of Reps.
So it goes beyond the closed door.
It goes beyond that. Senator Sabi. Senator Sabi,
I think this is the fundamental
we'll still have
point.
you. We'll still have you, but let's chew on one of the points that you have raised. You re-emphasize the fact that this is the Senate as an institution, and therefore it's bipartisan or tripartisan, whatever it is. It cuts across, all the political parties. Professor Yakubu, I would like you to respond to this. Despite the fact that this is a matter that Senator Sabi says, look, it's institutional, at the end of the day, matters will still have to be dealt with, in some cases, on a partisan basis. There's no indication, for instance, that if you were to put a matter to the vote, that you are going to have all 109, or if there's less any vacancy, voting the same way. Some of them might say aye, others will say nay, which means that there will be voices that will go for and there will be voices against. Take this against the background of what happened last year. There was a lot of excitement when the APC had its national caucus meeting last quarter of last year, and there was an excitement, that perhaps by now there will be better management of the political party, which has always been an issue with the democracy we've had since 1999, when people make comparisons to what happened in the Second Republic. What do you think is still wrong here, that they are still caught up in this logjam?
I think the issue, I want to start by disagreeing with distinguished senator that it is institutional. I mean, the function of the Senate or the National Assembly is clearly stated in the Constitution, and I don't think anybody has tried to compromise that. Why I say this is that names of nominees have been taken or submitted to the National Assembly or the Senate in particular, and they are to do their due diligent, processing of the whole affair, and they have come with the verdict that they cannot confirm the chairman of the EFCC. Whatever is the issue, the point I'm making is that if the executive branch still feels very strongly that this particular individual must be the choice of his choice. What I think, the point I raised earlier about lobbying is still very germane to the discussion we are having. And I'm happy to hear that, both the National Assembly advisor to the president, has, talked about, the series of meetings, both the ones that are, put in the public domain and those behind the scenes that have taken place between the presidency and the leadership of the National Assembly. And I'm saying, and this point is very important, about the power, the majority, status of the APC in the National Assembly. And I'm saying that, if this lobbying has taken place, they have met either in the open or behind the scene, and they have tried to explain to one another what the issues are. Then it should have been possible for this logjam to have been resolved by now. We are talking of somebody who has been, been nominated more than 2 years now. He's been on the slot for more than 2 years now. Now, ordinarily, appointments, especially, this is not political now, but in the civil service. If you are on acting basis for a period of six months and you are not confirmed, it's, it brings to the fore the very fact that it might not be possible. You might not be suitable for that appointment, and therefore there should have been a rethink about what to be done with the nominee. But I think that it is still, a partisan issue, and the APC in particular is the party that will have to resolve this. And I think also that with the majority it maintains in the National Assembly, it is possible after this series of meetings and engagements that there should have been a modus vivendi, an understanding about how to go about this issue of appointment. If it is on the base on a very strong principle, which has been explained to the executive, then of course, it becomes, mandatory or, necessary for the executive to actually look for an alternative. But the narrative actually going around the non-confirmation of the acting chairman of EFCC is based on what the public perception that it is because the gentleman or the leadership of the EFCC has already antagonized the National Assembly, and that is why the National Assembly, the Senate, that's why the confirmation has been quite problematic. Okay. If that is the case, I think there is also a need to see what is in the interest of the members of the
all right, Prof. Let me still remain with you on the issue of yes. Institution and partisan.
Yeah.
Now, by the constitutional provision, the two arms are supposed to be separate and independent.
Agreed.
But also have a cordial working relationship for governance to be effected. But if the Senate now, representing the National Assembly, continues to rubber stamp, say yes, sir, and approve everything that comes from the executive, wherein lies its independence, and how does it augur well for the people?
No, it has not done so. That's the point I'm making. It has
but
not.
If it becomes partisan and agrees with everything the party says, it has an independent power or independent powers to scrutinize and analyze in the interest of the people what is coming in from the executive.
Yeah, the point is still very relevant in the sense that yes, it has stated it's supposed to be autonomous, independent from any control or or remote control by the executive. I have no doubt about that. I stand for that sincerely. But what I'm saying is that if it's the matter has become what it is at the moment, to the extent that it will now even be featured on national television station to be discussed. I am saying that it is something there that has to be resolved and ought to have been resolved by now. If the question, the issues that have been, the issues that have been raised here about engagement between the two arms of government is anything to go by, I am saying that by now this logjam should have been resolved. Either the executive will now say, okay, based on the principal stand of the Senate, this gentleman or the nominee is going to be replaced, or that there is a stronger argument from the executive branch to enable the leadership of the Senate to understand that this is the most suitable individual for this appointment, and on the basis of the fact that both the majority in the Senate is constituted by APC, the president is also from the APC party. I am saying that it should have been resolved, even politically.
All right. Professor Nuhu Yakubu, Professor of Political Science and former Vice Chancellor, University of Abuja, would like to thank you for being part of our discussion this morning.
Thank you.
All right, so you see, Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break. When we return, we have another guest join us, and we still retain the two senators in this face-off. All right, you're welcome back. If you just joined us, it's still Good Morning Nigeria, and we're reaching you on the network service of Africa's largest TV network, the NTA. We have another guest joining us now for this discussion. It's also a political scientist, Dr. Ernest Ereke from the University of Abuja. Dr. Ereke, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Okay, just before we pop our first question to you, let's bring in again distinguished Senator Ita Enang, the Senior Special Assistant to the President on National Assembly Matters, Senate. It would appear that the crux, or if you like, the trigger for this whole logjam now in terms of non-clearance of presidential nominees has to do with what some observers have described as perhaps if some procedural misstep by the executive branch. Namely, there appeared to have been no security report accompanying the nomination of the acting chair of EFCC for confirmation as chairman of EFCC. And when, therefore, the report by the DSS came, the Senate held on to that and said, look, the report from the security report from the DSS says the nominee is not suitably qualified for X, Y, Z reasons. Why did there appear to have been that, again, as some observers have said, that misstep? Since the security clearance ordinarily is within the purview of the executive branch.
Precisely.
Now, you know, there will be security report twice. When a person is nominated by the executive, governor or the president, he goes through background checks of what he's been. Now, after you've been nominated, my office will seek, the Senate may also seek. And when it is my office seeks, we attach it to the document we submit to the Senate. Now, that is a second one. And the one that goes to, that is made by the, before the appointment, is the one that goes to the appointing or nominating authority. That is his private consumption. Now, the DSS is an independent body that gives out a security report on any matter. And the Senate is bound, the Senate is to look at it as one of the matters it is expected to consider in arriving at a decision. In this case, the Senate, the DSS, after the nomination, sent a report which we made available to the Senate. But let me also go back to the question that he said, the question of whether it is the question is institutional or is a partisan matter. As a veteran in the legislature is one. When you get into this House of Representatives or the Senate, you walk through the granites. And when you get to the door, you get to the red carpet in terms of the Senate or the green in terms of in the House of Representatives. As you step your foot on the green or the red carpet, your party dissolves to a certain extent. You become a senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and it is no more a question of the political party. Now, that is not to say that the political parties did not intervene at this matter. It is not every step that has been taken. It is those principal ones and the ones, this was principal though, and the ones that are very recent that I am mentioning. But I want to say that even after that, the executive is not resting. I had said that we had progressed beyond, but it may not be satisfactory to the legislature because we had, after that, had some, I repeat our words many times, back room. Now, it is still not satisfactory. We're still going to hold more because we will not tell the legislature, go to hell. No, that is not the style of President Buhari. That is not the style of the administration. We'll still be engaging. And of course, the level of engagement will not just be sitting and talking. By our sending nominations to the executive, to the legislature, we admit that they have the powers to confirm. And we also admit that these laws were proposed by us, the executive, forwarded to the legislature. The legislature passed it. We signed, the executive assented to it. So it is not a law made by the legislature. It's not a law of the legislature. It's a law of the land. But we also say, look, do your job, I do my job. And if there is a level of some misunderstanding, we hold this discussion, and the discussion continues until we arrive at a solution. We want to say that we are very, very willing. Mr. President respects the legislature.
We know that.
I respect the legislature. And otherwise, we would have been saying hard things and throwing, and much of what has been discussed would have been in public domain. And finally, let me say also that in response to what he said, that a question of institutional, we want to also say that it is not about the leadership or the presiding officers. We appreciate the leadership and the presiding status of Senator Bukola Saraki as President of the Senate. And so we don't hold any of these things about him, around him, against him. We know he's provided leadership and he has cooperated with the president and the executive.
You know, the distinguished Senator Enaita, as former chairman Senate Committee on Rules and Ethics, and now the
Rules and Business,
and now the SSA to the President and Senate Matters. We would have loved to hear from you how you advise the President on matters like this, you know, in terms of resolutions passed by the Senate and other issues, you know, for amicable, you know, working cordial relationship. But keep that in mind.
Yeah, and that's not clear. I know that
yes.
You have a question for Dr. Reke, but I'm sure that we have the opportunity of returning to Senator Enang.
Yeah.
The question I asked about the security report and the comments and the comments that have been made, it's not been fully addressed, because that's what the Senate latched onto to say, look, this is the reason why we cannot confirm this nominee. First time, no. Second time, no. And thereafter, the matter went viral that, look, the executive can leave the chairman to continue to act in an acting, to remain in an acting capacity. If you have a response to that, we'll take it. Otherwise, you know,
it's still in line with how you advise in your capacity.
The question is the security report. You know, if you interview most of the senators, very many senators would say that two issues may not be or may be. Some may have been influenced by the security report. Some may have been influenced by questions put on the floor and responses. But the question of my advice, it will not be appropriate, and I plead privilege, that it will not be appropriate for me to state one way or the other opinion that I have offered on this matter either way, because I liaise between the executive and the legislature. And what we discuss, that is why I will not tell you what was discussed between the leadership and the president is privileged. What I discussed with the Senate president and the leadership is privileged. So on this question, I plead my privilege.
All right, Senator Enaita, thanks a lot. But the question I asked is still
the question
hanging.
It's still hanging.
But let's bring in now. Let's bring in now. The privilege is upheld. Let's bring in now Dr. Ernest Sereke. Dr. Ernest Sereke, you've had, of course, you've been listening to the comments of the two guests since the program started. Let's have your take on what's playing out and where you think the snag is and perhaps how it can be resolved.
Okay, thank you very much. I think listening to the two distinguished senators, it does appear, and then again, if you look at happenings between the National Assembly and the executive, as well as if you go down to the state level, it does appear that our leaders in the two arms have a very poor understanding of what the doctrine of separation of power really means. Because it appears that the way they go about relating with each other shows that they believe that separation of powers says that we have different governments. And that is not what separation of power implies. Separation of power simply says that in order to ensure efficiency and liberty, so that one does not abuse does not abuse powers, and to ensure that we can hold somebody responsible and accountable for performance of his functions, that we share these powers of the state to different branches and arms of one government. And that is why we talk about a system, that the various arms are part of one body, and therefore they have overlapping functions and they depend on each other. However, what has played out over the years in Nigeria is that both the executive and the legislature believe that they are running separate governments, and that is not what the principle of separation of power really implies. Then again, the learned professor, Professor Nuhu Yakub, mentioned that you can blame the political party for not being able to whip its members into line. Now, if you go to other democracies across the world, you will discover that political parties do not only provide and sponsor candidates to elections, especially as far as parliamentary politics is concerned. The political party must get actively involved in the affairs of the parliament. And therefore, you can blame the weak party system we have in Nigeria for a lot of the challenges that we have had as far as legislative and executive relationships are concerned. again, if you go back to history, you will discover that from 1999, we took off on a very wrong footing, where the executive felt that it could muzzle the legislature into, serving its own whims and caprices. And then the legislature decided to resist, that muzzling and to assert itself. Now, from 1999 till date, it does appear that we now have an ingrained culture of executive, legislative squabbles. And therefore, for me, you can locate this problem within, as I said, a poor understanding of what the principle of separation of powers mean, and then again, as well as the weakness of the political party, where the party takes the back seat after elections, and people that the party has sponsored, campaigned for, and worked for to get elected into offices, become stronger than the political parties, forgetting that the party has programs and ideologies which it sold to the people. And therefore, those who contested and won elections on the platform of the political parties are supposed to uphold, through laws, through policies and programs, those policies, those ideologies that the political party canvassed in elections.
Okay, Dr. Reke, would you have preferred that the president ab initio, interfered in the affairs of the Senate, for instance? Let's locate it with the emergence of the Senate president.
No, again, one is not trying to say that the executive must always interfere in the selection of the leadership of, the legislature. Now, recall that we said...
Because that appears to be the root of all these face-off. That's the beginning.
No, what we are saying is that the political party did not play the role it should have played. I listened to Senator Itaenang talking about the backstage interaction between the executive and the legislature. A lot of what you see formally take place within the informal. It is after you have taken decisions, lobbied informally, that you take decisions formally. And so what we are advocating is not that the executive should interfere in the selection of leadership of the legislature. Of course, one will give credit to the president for not having interfered in the election of the present leadership of the 8th National Assembly, even though some persons have derided the president for not having so interfered. But then the president deserves commendation for not interfering. However, we are saying that because there is a political party involved in this case, this political party sponsored these same candidates in elections, and these political parties have, have ideologies, have programs and policies which it seeks to achieve or to execute, and without which the people will not re-elect that political party.
How could the political parties have resolved the issue of the nomination of the EFCC chairman, for instance, which borders on, a document provided by, one of its agencies?
Again, we continue to say that there are certain decisions, somebody talked about lobbying. You lobby, you discuss informally. But if you look at the issue of the nomination and confirmation of the EFCC chairman, in this case, you may have to take the blame squarely to the executive. As you rightly said, the National Assembly or the Senate did not just see the face of Mago and said, we will not confirm you. The National Assembly acted on the basis of a report that came from one agency of the executive.
All right, Dr. Ereke, thank you very much. Senator Sabi, we know that, first let me give you the opportunity to respond to some of the issues right now on the table, and then I have another question for you.
All right, first let me say that in organizational dynamics, the informal, like Dr. Ereke said, is actually the iceberg that can, send, no matter how strong a ship is, no
matter how Titanic.
So the Titanic, story. Now, what I want to say here is that, you see, in all of this, we keep emphasizing the party. We keep emphasizing the role of leadership. And for me, clearly, all of these things are very simple and straightforward. Like I've said earlier, there was a basis for the Senate discussing in chamber that this is an affront to the powers of the Senate as an institution, not minding whether this is majority or this is minority. Because if confirmations are done, you will hear, will the Senate confirm so-so and so-so person as whatever title he has. It's not the question of will the majority, it is will the Senate. And that's why I said it's institutional. Now, within this context, if we want to solve this problem, it is very straightforward, like I said. What brought about this altercation is there. But with respect to even the issue of Magu, let me perhaps refresh our memory. When the first nomination came and we saw the report, we did not outrightly, we decided to say, okay, let's give some, what did they call it, soft landing. And that was why we went out and said, we cannot confirm him. We are returning him back to his nominator for further necessary action. Our expectation then was that the executive will go and do the needful and do whatever. And when the nomination returns to us, all the gray areas pointed out in the first instance will have been resolved. But by the time the nomination came back, it were at the same level, there was nothing. We now said, fine, let's bring in for the confirmation hearing. It was on live TV. And I will tell you, on that very day, there were many people who were rooting for his confirmation. But also based on his performance, and especially where the questions that were raised in the letter of the security, what did they call it, report, were put forward to him. He was now giving reasons to the fact that he didn't know this question would be asked. So he didn't come with his written, response. I think from that particular moment on, I will tell you categorically, as a spokesman, I interact a lot with my colleagues because I must understand the issues. If I come to speak here, I must be able to speak on the basis of the fact that that is the position of the Senate. And I think it was at that particular point, many people just decided to say, look, come, my voice is not going to go for a year for this particular person. So what we expect is simple. Nigeria is big. We have very brilliant and wonderful people. The executive, in the interest of good governance, should please do the needful and let us take the whole of these issues and resolve them. Because we are serving the people. We believe whatever we do today, okay, we don't want to set a precedence that will set this country backwards. We should set precedents that will promote the goodness that this country badly deserves. And I think on this particular issue, it is clear. Now, let me also say that this 8th Senate has been very, very cooperative in terms of meeting the needs of the executive, providing the executive with support. And so to that extent, I disagree with Doctor who thinks we in the National Assembly do not understand the concept of separation of power. We clearly do. And I think, like Senator Itainan said, when the executive and the legislature and all the three arms are kept in glove, Achishuru, everything quiet, the people are in for trouble.
Mm-hmm. They should carry cane and beat both of them.
The essence of democracy is we agree to disagree. Yeah. Disagreement does not mean, enmity. It does not mean, war. I think it is just for issues to be clarified so that the best decision that we take, whatever decision we take, must be in the overall interest of the people. Because for us in the legislature, we represent the people as much as the president, who is, also elected. But you see, the point is, I'm interested in going back to represent the little interest of that senatorial district that actually asked me to come here and be their voice. Okay. And it's the same thing for each of the 109 senators and the 360 House of Rep members. So it is an aggregation. And in the course of aggregation, some people will have their way, while some people will have their say. What is important is the interests of Nigeria must be paramount.
All right, distinguished Senator, I still have a question for you, which is pending, but let's quickly run through some of the tweets that have come, in addition to the ones that have been scrolling on the screen. Sani Michael Amakoji, one of our regulars. In advanced democracies, the three arms of government are autonomous, and there is healthy rift for democracy to thrive, and no arm of government is caged to serve as a rubber stamp. The narrative must change.
And Victor, excuse me, Victor Ohioshumwa tweets, it's time the lingering face-off between the executive and Senate be resolved. It's an ego thing. The people are the ones affected. Government business is suffering. Both should maintain their constitutional functions. They should continue to engage. And just before, Senator
I have
Sabi.
a question for him, yes.
Yes.
I have a question. Senator Sabi, the National Assembly, in particular the Senate, has been in the forefront, as it were, in seeking to revive the economy, strengthen the economy. We know of your business roundtable, and when Nigeria exited recession, we had you here. You talked about the role of the Senate. I'm wondering, is the Senate ready and willing to cut his nose to spite his face by digging in and saying we won't consider any further nominations from the president unless and until the presidency or the executive branch changes its position? I'm asking this question, for instance, against the background of the vacancies you have in the NDIC, which is, and then crucially, the central bank. The Monetary Policy Committee meeting didn't hold in January. There are some 8 or so vacancies there. For how long will this linger? And how long can you hold out to say, look, whatever it takes, we'll be stuck with whatever the CBN, the Monetary Policy Committee, comes up with? Interest rate officially still remains at about 14% or thereabout, and there are key monetary policy issues to deal with. That's why I'm asking the question, will the Senate cut his nose to spite his face?
Well, let me say one thing. When it becomes necessary for you to cut your nose to spite your face, I think you do that. But it's a decision and it's a choice. In this particular instance, it is not necessary for us to cut our nose, because we need our nose to breathe properly and to think, so that at the end of the day, we will be able to serve Nigerians in the best interest of the country. So within this context, I don't think it is about whether we need to spite, cut our nose to spite our face. But let me say one thing. I'm always very disturbed when we borrow the good things of advanced democracies, we make references to all of them and whatnot. Today, the world is a global village. We know what is playing out all over. In other countries that we quickly try to cite, just a mention of an appointee, for example, and issues being brought about him, the next thing you see is a decision being taken so that integrity and clarity is maintained. In this particular instance, like we have said, what is so sacrosanct, what is so special about, the nominee? We have done our own part, because like I said, when we, cleared other people, they took it. And those people are working. So if we are good in saying that these people are good to go, and they have gone, and they are working, why should we not also be good in saying that this one is not good to go? Okay, and it should be respected.
Let's pause to distinguished Senator. Dr. Reke, quickly, we've run out of time. Now, you listen to Senator Sabi Abdullahi. He talked about the fact that whatever they do, that's the Senate, is in the interest of Nigerians, implying that, the face-off between the executive and the Senate is in the interest, or is being driven by the interest of Nigerians. But look at the issue of Babatri Lawal, which is eventually being addressed. Does it point to the sincerity and objectivity of the Senate in dishing out some of those resolutions?
Well, let me first disagree that the executive and the legislature cannot have a warm embrace and yet still check and balance each other or monitor each other, as the case were. And again, I would like to refer the distinguished senator to a very recent incident in the United States of America, where we borrow most of these things. You will recall that only recently the US government was shut down as a result of disagreement between the executive and the legislature there over DACA and WALD. Now, recall that the Republican senators and Democrats really disagreed and voted to shut down the government. But eventually, when it became a matter of national interest, when they discovered that it was affecting the delivery of services to the general, for the general well-being of Americans, the two parties in the Senate agreed, even though the issues were not addressed, they agreed and resolved to reopen government. And so even if the Senate believes that, that the executive has really embarrassed it in the public by saying that they do not have certain powers, to confirm certain nominees, I think in the interest of the nation, the Senate should be able to take a cue from what happened in the US, where they had to compromise and reopen government in the interest of the nation. In this case as well, for instance, you have mentioned the issue of the Monetary Policy Committee, of the CBN, as well as other critical agencies of government that are still waiting on the Senate to confirm nominees before it can function. I think the Senate can take a cue from what has happened in the United States of America by going ahead to confirm those nominees so that the running of government can continue and government can continue to serve the people that it has been elected to serve.
Okay, but Dr. Reke, just before we wrap it up, very quickly, because Senator Ita Enang has talked about the backstage consultations and what the political party is doing and the president is doing. As a political watcher, how then do you contextualize certain occurrences? You are meeting with the leadership of, you're having backstage or backroom conversations, and yet there are reports in the media of threats to remove Saraki as president, and then this trial is resuming at the code of whatever is called anti-corruption trial. It's also going on. So he's sitting on the seat of he's sitting on the edge of his seat. And you're having conversations with him. You think he has the presence of mind to go along with you, and then to convince his colleagues to also go along with you? Dr. Reke, very quickly.
Well, all of these are the issues that help, to bring up the acrimony between the executive and the legislature. While one would not advocate that whoever has committed offenses should be overlooked, however, there are some of these issues are what unsettles, the relationship between the executive and the legislature. But then going forward, we can advise that beyond just the consultation between the executive and the leadership of the legislature, as Senator Sabis mentioned, the leadership of the legislature is just first among equals. Now, you can take this consultation beyond the leadership. Nothing stops the office of the senior special advisor to the president on the legislature from organizing retreats between the executive
Dr. Reke,
and members
I'm
of the
sorry.
Parliament.
I'm sorry. I have to really cut you, interrupt here because we've run out of time. Senator Enang, briefly, in less than 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that we will soon get out of this. And I want to again say that we've moved beyond that again, having reasserted that the legislature has powers to confirm. We present our nominees. And we also plead with the legislature that the legislature does not go on strike. And so they would, let's progress beyond this. And I want to also say that there should be some level of separating the issues. That is, separate the issues. You can keep the issue of the EFCC aside and then take out the economy, central bank, electricity regulatory commission, all others, while this one is being sorted
Distinguished
out,
Senator
instead of declaring a blank
to the
strike against the
President
executive.
on National Assembly Matters. Senate, thank you very much. I'm sure that distinguished Senator Sabi has heard your plea.
Yeah.
Senator Aliyu Sabi Abdullahi, Chairman, Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs.
Just before you
very
go,
much.
let me reiterate that we are not on strike.
Because
we just cleared 9 people for your rec.
Dr.
We are not on strike, and we are right now in chambers, so we are not on strike.
Department of Political Science, University of Abuja. We'd like to appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming on to Good Morning Nigeria. Gentlemen, that's our program, but first of all, we'll just visit our sports desk.
Nigeria will at 8 6:30 p.m. today, play against Sudan in Marrakesh, Morocco, for a place in the 2018 African Nations Championship CHAN final. The home-based Super Eagles have netted 6 times in their previous 4 matches, coming from behind in their last 2 games. Nigeria got to the semis at the 2014 edition in South Africa, while Sudan did the same when they hosted the competition in 2011. In Morocco, the CHAN Eagles dumped Angola 2-1 in the quarter-final, while Sudan upset tournament favourites Zambia 1-0 to book their place in the last 4. Host Morocco and Libya will meet for a North African derby in the first semi-final of the 2018 African Nations Championship on Wednesday evening. The match is set for the Stade Mohammed V in Casablanca. In the meantime, the Nigerian football governing ruling body, the NFF, on Tuesday in Abuja officially unveiled former Sweden coach Thomas Denaby as the new coach of the country's senior women national team, the Super Falcons. Denaby, who was appointed Falcons' new coach last Thursday, signed a 2.5-year deal to manage the Falcons, expected to hit the ground running as he will lead the team to the WAFU Cup of Nations in February.
My philosophy around the team is to get the best out of every player and everyone in the coaching staff. And I'm convinced that the best way to develop and improve the team.
Thomas Denaby took over from coach Florence Omagbemi, who led the team to the 2016 African Women's Cup of Nations in Cameroon, and will be assisted by Jorgan Peterson, the 3 yet to be named Nigerian coaches.
All right, that's sports. Let's go over now to the Weather Center for the weather report.
Thanks for staying tuned. The subtropical high pressure over the north of the country is at its peak. Hence, the frequency of dust haze and dust storms over the northern parts of the country. This is expected to be on the increase within the next 48 hours. The central cities and the inland cities of the south should be in poor horizontal visibility throughout the day, while the coast is expected to be hazy in the morning and partly cloudy by afternoon. As for temperatures, thermal lows across the country should keep the coast and inland cities under high temperatures compared to a couple of days ago. I am Imara Joyce and do stand by for the temperature forecast. Thanks for watching and bye.
All right, thank you very much, Imara Joyce, there for the weather report. And with that, it's time up for us today on Good Morning Nigeria. We appreciate your tuning in. We're back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock. My name is Kingsley Osadolo. Have a nice day.
All right, I am Claire Delabu Abdurazak. Don't forget, Chiko Dinaka is also my name. We'll see you tomorrow. Watch a repeat broadcast later today on channel 101 Star Times on NT News 24. 5 minutes past 5. That's the time. From all of us here, bye-bye.